Mike Froman, Deputy National Security Advisor for International Economic Affairs. Thanks for joining us.
Good to be here.
Let me ask, first of all, a translation question. I think to a lot of Americans watching, this is a whole bunch of politicians doing a lot of talking and coming out of a meeting with a piece of paper. Explain to the average person what is happening here and why they should like it.
Well, look, I think you have to look back over the last 10 months and see what the G20 has done. First starting in Washington, then moving to London in April, and now coming to Pittsburgh. If you just look back at London in April, at that point, people were talking about there being a real possibility of depression. And the G20 came together and engaged in an unprecedented degree of concerted action to stimulate their economies, fix their regulatory systems, and mobilize resources for the international system to prevent the crisis from spreading to other countries. And basically, it worked. It worked. We're not out of the woods yet. We need to remain vigilant. And part of what we'll be doing here in Pittsburgh, part of what the leaders will be doing here in Pittsburgh, is talking about the future and laying the groundwork for balanced, sustainable, strong growth going forward, finishing the agenda of regulatory reform, and dealing with some of the other global issues, including energy and climate change.
But speaking of the road ahead, why should an American who's out of work right now, we've got an unemployment rate of 9.7%, take comfort in this meeting, given the fact that President Obama has said he's inclined against additional stimulus, and mostly the leaders here are expected to affirm what they did before, not offer any new financial commitments?
Well, I think one of the lessons of this crisis is that our economy is very much interlinked with economies around the world. And when global growth declines, it affects us back here. It makes it harder to export when nobody's buying abroad. When our financial system's at risk, or other countries' financial systems are at risk, it hurts us back here in terms of the availability of credit. And we can't export, and that hurts jobs. And so we have an interest in making sure that all countries are working together.
So why not more stimulus?
Well, I think we'll be talking about what policies are necessary to have balanced, sustainable, strong growth going forward. That may require some adjustments by countries. For us, it tends to be increased savings. For other countries, it may mean moving from export-led growth to more domestic demand or consumer-led growth. And for all countries, it has to do with structural change to improve the prospects of higher growth trajectories going forward.
Some countries, particularly France, have talked about in the financial regulation process particular dollar caps on executive compensation. The Obama administration has rejected that approach. Why?
Well, I think President Obama and Secretary Geithner have been very focused on executive comp and taken a number of actions and put forward a number of proposals, including in legislation. And I think there's broad agreement broadly within the G20 about the importance of transparency and disclosure of compensation programs, the importance of independent compensation committees and corporate governance, and very importantly, the importance of aligning individual compensation with risk and performance. And that's broadly agreed. There are some differences between some members of the G20, but I'm confident that we'll reach agreement before the
Why no dollar caps from the U.S. perspective?
I think the perspective is that it's important that the compensation programs themselves align the right incentives, but that we're not trying to set individual caps. I think the President shared the sense of outrage about high executive bonuses by firms that have recently received public aid during the crisis, but at the same time felt that it was important to have the supervisors have the ability to evaluate compensation programs and make sure that they were aligning incentives in a way to prevent a future crisis from occurring in the future.
Does it matter that the United States comes to a different conclusion on that than other countries on issues like bank capital requirements, or those things that are all going to get settled at the individual country level anyway?
I think the way the process works is that we will try and forge international agreements on principles around capital or around executive compensation, and then it's up to each national authority to implement that. And we're trying to lay out some specific deadlines for those actions to be taken, and I'm confident we'll reach agreement in those areas.
Let me ask you about climate change, which is an issue that the President talked about in New York at the United Nations, and you're trying to make some progress ahead of the Copenhagen meeting in December. Given the fact that it's not likely the Senate's going to act on this issue by December, what can you realistically accomplish with China, with your other negotiating partners here in Pittsburgh?
Well, first of all, we do hope that the Congress will act as quickly as it can on energy legislation. We are engaged in a wide variety of diplomatic efforts, both through the climate change negotiations, the Copenhagen process, but also the Major Economies Forum, which the President launched in April, which brings together the largest countries to try and work through some of these climate change issues, and also bilaterally with China, with India, with Canada and Mexico, and a number of other countries, all of Latin America.
Was the Chinese concession or new initiative at the UN significant in the view of the United States?
I think each of these steps is important. We have to wait to see their significance until we see full numbers and how it reflects on the rest of what they're willing to do.
Can the United States anticipate a successful outcome in Copenhagen if Congress has not acted, if the Senate has not acted as the House has on climate change?
We are working to make Copenhagen a significant step forward in dealing with the problems of climate change.
In either case, whether Congress acts or not.
Correct. And in the meantime, we're taking every action that we possibly can to deal with the issue. One of the things we've done here at the G20 is put on the table the issue of phasing out inefficient fossil fuel subsidies that encourage wasteful consumption of fossil fuels. That has a significant impact on climate change. It's good for energy security, it's good economic policy, it's good health policy, but it also has a significant impact on climate change. So we're using all the tools at our disposal to try and deal with the issue.
Two other things before I let you go. On trade, the tariffs on Chinese tires seem out of step with the rhetoric the G20 has offered in London and that I would expect it to offer here on discouraging protectionism. Was that deliberate to do that for a domestic political audience in the United States before this meeting?
No, I think the President believes in free and open trade and believes that enforcing our trade agreements and enforcing our trade laws is part and parcel of keeping the trading system open. If we're going to go to Congress, we're going to go to constituents and ask them to support us in trade agreements, we need to be committed to implementing and enforcing the provisions that we've negotiated. And that was exactly the case with Chinese tires.
So it was a message to organized labor. You can trust us when we say we're going to protect your interests.
I think it was a message to American workers, American families, to Congress, and to the international community that we take enforcement seriously. But beyond being the message, it was that the ITC found that there had been a disruption in the market, and that the President and recommended a remedy for the President to consider. But we don't view the enforcement of our trade laws or the enforcement of trade agreements as protectionism.
Finally, about this venue itself, the G20. You've now met in Washington, in London, now in Pittsburgh. Is it time to kill off the G8? Is that as anachronistic as a cassette tape player right now?
I think the G20 has proven to be very useful in dealing with the crisis, and I think has helped indicate that the importance of having not just the industrialized countries, but the major emerging markets around the table when it comes to dealing with international economic issues. I think, as the President said in a speech last week, that has served a great value, and he would expect it to serve an important value going forward.
But is it time to say that the G8 is irrelevant? There are only so many economic summit meetings that you can lay on for heads of state.
Indeed. I think it is time to update our international architecture to reflect the realities of the international economy. We'll be trying to do some of that here, including reforming IMF and World Bank governance. But the G8 has played a critical role in the past. It has proven itself flexible to deal with a number of different issues, and it could well serve an important role going forward.
Has it met for the last time?
I don't think so.
Mike Froman, thanks for joining us.